Hello, thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the ESHA webinar going over tips and tricks for more effective searching. A little background on ESHA Research and Genesis before we get into the actual subject. ESHA Research was established in 1981 as one of the very first ever nutrition software solutions. Today we provide solutions for recipe and product development, labeling, nutrition analysis, and regulatory compliance. We offer the solutions of Genesis Food and supplements for your labeling needs, the food processor, and we also have consulting services. Today we're going to look at the Genesis R&D application. Genesis was released in 1991 and is designed for helping you manage the challenges faced in the food industry, things like product development, formulation, nutrition labeling, costing, and regulatory compliance. Looking into the future, we do have a few webinars coming up next month. On January 17th, we're going to have a menu labeling draft guidance overview. This is going to go over the restaurant labeling guidelines that go into effect next year. This is going to go just over the regulations and how you can comply with that. And then on January 30th, we're going to have a recipe development management, making groups work for you. So looking at the groups function of Genesis, how you can efficiently and effectively organize and manage that, along with access control of your ingredients and recipes. As always, please note that this webinar is being recorded. All of our previous webinars are available on our website, and you can submit any questions you have on the control panel of GoToWebinar. So if you have any questions during this webinar, please go ahead, feel free to ask. Today's agenda, my colleague Alicia here is going to go over all of this information. So we're going to take a look at searching today, search return results, function keys, additional search considerations, and then searching within the Genesis application, preferences and displays, detailed searches and examples. I want to take a look at some best practices as well. One thing that I will note, I did mention Genesis specifically with this. Most of this information will translate over into the food processor application as well if you are using the food processor. So note, Alicia will probably mention Genesis specifically the majority of the time, but it does apply to both applications. And then we're going to take a look at just a few questions if you have any afterwards. With that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Alicia, and she'll walk us through all this great information.
Thank you, Ben. Yes, and as Ben mentioned, we'll talk a lot about Genesis, but most of these concepts and functions apply to both programs. Today we will be working in Genesis and speaking about food processor and looking at the search results and some tips and hints to help you along your way. Searching is one of the first steps you'll perform with ESHA software. So if you're new to Genesis, today's webinar should provide some helpful hints for getting started. If you have used Genesis or the food processor for some time, you may discover some new ways to consider searching and organizing your files. Just a brief, broad discussion about the search results. In general, when you search in Genesis, the results are typically in this order. Frequently used items. So Genesis remembers which items, ingredients, and recipes you've used most frequently and displays these at the top of your search results. Then user added items, the ingredients that you've added to your software, and then remaining matches. There's a default setting of 400 items. When you search for ingredients or recipes, we'll show you how to change that default if you want to increase or get rid of that limitation. In broad terms, the primary search method finds matches for ingredients and recipe names by description. It also searches for codes and product and supplier information. So you can search by partial word, whole words, supplier and products, and various codes. If you do enter a search term, again, you could try and enter a partial word search. That might look something like strawberry instead of strawberries or strawberry, where you want to omit the ending of the food because some of the ingredients are listed in plural or singular form. So this just increases your search results. Another is if you can never remember how to spell broccoli, you might just type in B-R-O-C and you'll get matches for broccoli. You can also see some other examples here. For whole word search, we also refer to this as the dot search. So you can enter a term with a dot following it, and the software will find matches. As an example here, if you type in TEA, press enter, you will see all results that match that term. That can include items like steamed and steak. But if you're looking for just tea items, type in TEA dot, press enter, and you'll see a filtered search with things like tea leaves and iced tea. As I mentioned, you can search by product and supplier. In the the ESHA database, we refer to product as brand or product lines, and we do refer to the supplier as the manufacturer or the larger organization that provides the data. You can search by a variety of codes. We have user code, ESHA code, and government code. User code are codes that you would assign to ingredients or recipes, and you can assign a user code to those ingredients and recipes that you've added or ingredients in the ESHA database. An ESHA code is an internal code that we assign to ESHA database ingredients. If you have added ingredients to your software, these will not be assigned an ESHA code. And then government codes are those that we see from our national databases, like the USDA database, the Canadian Nutrient File, and the UK database. And these numbers are those agencies' codes that they assign to their foods. When we talk about filtered searches, we have a variety of ways to narrow down the search results that you see when you type in information. You can filter searches by using the function keys on your keyboard. Let me just describe some of these for you, and we'll get into a few of those in greater detail. The F3 function key is the more search. The F4 is the name only search. So if you type in a term, it will find matches to the name, the item name only. F5 is the nutrient search that allows you to search by nutrient content. F6 is the user code search. So again, any of those user codes that you've assigned to items, you can filter searches using the F6 key. The F7 searches through your recipe names. The F8 is the name and code search, and that is the default setting for searches in Genesis. So that one's not really used a lot. The F11 key will filter searches by the government code. So again, typing in a code, press F11, it will find matches to any that use a specific government code. We'll also talk about the where used search, and this is a way to find recipes that use a particular ingredient in your collection. So now we can just jump right into Genesis, and I'll show you some of these search filters in action. When I open up the program, if I just look at a generic screen, the opening screen of Genesis, I can click on Open and Ingredient, and I'll see this search for field. You'll see the search for field throughout. So if you're working in a recipe, adding an ingredient, or looking for ingredients, this search for field will show up. You'll also see a variety of columns, and we'll discuss those. I'll just show you a very general search. I'll type in milk here, press enter, and the software shows me a list of any matches to the term that I typed in. So this could be in the item name, the product and supplier, any of those name fields. It's looking for milk. And you also see here, there's a default limit of the 400 items. So that applies automatically. Let me show you how to adjust that, because you may or may not want that filter. So to remove the filter or increase it, from the Home tab, if I click on Preferences, in this General section, scroll down and you'll see the search limit count. You can increase that, so if you wanted 1,000, but in this case, I'm just going to set it to 0, and I'll have no limitations on my searches. So now it'll be free reign. If I go back to my ingredient search, type in milk again, press enter, and then the software, see how many more it's showing. And again, it's any matches to that term milk, and it could be included in the product, supplier, or the item name. If I want to include a more specific search term, I might add that, like milk 2, and here I might be looking for 2% milks. Of course, this milk 2 again is matching my search term, so it's also going to display any other fields or the other columns that have a match with milk and 2. And for the columns that we're displaying on this screen, you can adjust those. Sometimes you may want to limit some of the information that you're viewing. Or if you're sharing information with others, like on a report, you might want to take away some of the information and just give them what you need to show. Here, if I right-click in this screen, I'll see the list of columns available. If I uncheck one of those, like the user code, it goes away. If I want it back, again, right-click, select the column that I want to see, and it shows on the screen. I can also sort the search results by the column headers. So if I just click on the column header, it will place that column in order. Here, the item name is alphabetical. I might want to search if I'm looking for a particular ESHA code. I can sort by that, or sort by product and suppliers. So just click again on that header, and it places the information in the order. So diving into more of those, the function keys and filtered searches, I'll show you the F3 or the more search. So again, I'm just using the generic ingredient search, but you could also do this in the recipe screen as well. So if I just open ingredient and press the F3 key, it's going to open up the more search screen. I can also access this search from the more search button right there. The more search can allow me to search by multiple fields at one time. I might search by names. I could search by government codes or ESHA codes. I can also search by groups. So just an example here, if I search for a government code, 15002, and search, the government code matching that item shows. So it's anchovies. If I switched that to ESHA code, typed in the same number, I see I get a different food because it's matching to the ESHA code. And one more example, for government code, sometimes you might type in a government code and see multiple matches and they're different foods. So just note here that these are coming from different sources. The USDA and the UK database use the same government code, but it's different foods, completely different data sets, so completely different foods. This is a good reinforcement of the importance of viewing some of these columns, like the product and supplier. I do encourage you to, of course, you need to see the item name. ESHA code is very helpful to view on the screen, as well as product and supplier. It just tells you and others, if you're sharing information, where these sources of data and where the information is coming from. Going back to the more search, let me talk about groups a little bit. This is from a database perspective. If I click on select, I will see the groups that are available in the software, and these come readily populated for many foods. We have the groups broken into several different sections. One is the characteristics. These are not allergens. These are just characteristics that some foods will fall into, like dairy-free, gluten-free, kosher, vegan. And when we know for an ESHA ingredient what group this may fall into, either by information the supplier has provided or inherently for that ingredient, we'll assign it to the groups. Another section of these groups is the database, and databases are broken into several different categories. Here we also have the UK database and the Canadian nutrient file. Another view of groups is by food group, and again with ESHA database ingredients, we assign foods to these particular food groups as a way to help categorize the foods. When you are adding ingredients and recipes to your program, you can certainly use these food groups and characteristics and assign your ingredients and recipes to those groups as a way to help you sort and filter and organize your files. You can also add groups to your software. And let me show you an example of searching with the food groups. If I do check the bread and bakery group and search, oops, sorry, make sure the name radio button is selected. I was still on government code. And perform a search. This is showing me all the ingredients that are assigned to the bread and bakery group. If I go back to that and filter further, I can select gluten-free. So it's showing me bread and bakery items that are gluten-free. And yet again, if I type in a search term, still under bread and bakery and gluten-free as it shows here, these are my bread type items that are gluten-free. So another way to just use the more search to filter through. Another search that helps filter is the F5 or the nutrient search. And this search can be approached in a couple different ways. Again, with my generic search, I'm just pressing the F5 key on my keyboard and it opens up the nutrient search screen. This is a way to filter through ingredients based on the nutritional content and by parameters that I set. One approach to this is just to get a general feel for the content of specific foods. And this is an approach that I often use. If I just want to get a feel of how much protein is in a particular set of foods or how much fat, I'm trying to identify those. I can set parameters. Another approach is if you're working in a specific recipe, you can open up your recipe, use the F5 search to search through ingredients and select right there from the search result list to add to your recipe. So the first step of the nutrient search is to select a nutrient. So here we're going to work with protein today. I'm going to select protein from my list of available nutrients. And once I've selected a nutrient, you'll see this middle column is populated with a parameter. It does automatically set to equal, but if I just click in the column, I'll see the drop-down list, and I can choose greater than or equal to. Today we're going to do greater than or equal to 10. Whatever value I enter here in the value column is going to correspond with the unit for that nutrient. Some nutrients are reported in grams, some in micrograms, etc. So this is looking for ingredients that are greater than or equal to 10 grams of protein. I've used my software today already, but typically the default setting is a limit of 1,000 for your search results within this screen. So I'm just going to set it back to that. And depending on how broad your search is, the search can take a few seconds and sometimes a little longer. But here we'll see, by default, your search will be limited to 1,000 items. And this is showing me ingredients that contain 10 grams or more of protein. Not necessarily per serving, but it is per the amount that was reported in the data that we received. With our government databases and many suppliers, information is reported per 100 grams. So this is telling me how much protein is in 100 grams. Some show by serving size and some show greater amounts. So just be aware of that. Depending on the source, it may be reported in different amounts. Within this screen, the default is to report these alphabetically by name. You can sort, again, by clicking on the column header. What I often do is click on the nutrient that I searched for, and here is ascending or descending order, depending on how many clicks, but I could also sort by product and supplier or ESHA code. Again, any of those columns can be sorted appropriately. To return to my search parameters, again, click in the search for field and press F5. That takes me right back where I left off. So here are my conditions again. And here I could search by search terms. I could search by selecting groups. I can clear this or increase this limit if I so choose. And let me show you one other example. If I want to search for a specific search term, I can just type that in here. I'm going to search for beef brisket, and I'm also going to include USDA. So again, this is showing me all beef briskets from the USDA that contain 10 grams or more protein per 100 grams in this case, because I know that my USDA information is reported per 100 grams. And I can sort this information by the protein value. So another way of looking at this information is if I'm trying to find a certain percentage of protein and kind of work within that range, then I can look at my protein content per 100 grams. I know it's about 20%, 21% for these items here. Just another way of viewing ingredients and helping me select what I might need for my recipes. So the Where Used search, as I mentioned before, allows me to find my recipes that use a particular ingredient. So I've just clicked on Open Recipe, and it shows me my list of recipes that I've added to my software. If I use the More search within this recipe screen, you'll see that this More search includes a line that says search within items for matches to the above criteria. And I want to make sure that that box is checked. I'm searching by name, so I'm going to enter a search term here. And I want to find all of my recipes that contain sugar. Let me get rid of these here just to clear those. And when I search for sugar in my recipes, it's pulling up 6 recipes that contain sugar as an ingredient. The more specific I am with this search term, the more it will narrow down those searches. So here I searched again, and it's leaving out one of the recipes that it pulled before because that recipe used a different type of sugar. So just speaking on some best practices for searching through the software, you want to familiarize yourself with your organization's database naming conventions. And if your organization doesn't have database naming convention or ingredient naming conventions or recipe naming conventions, you might consider establishing some. You want everyone working on the same page. And establish consistency with naming practices, the use of user codes for recipes and ingredients, and considering versioning of your recipes so that, again, if anyone is sharing files or you're going through your process of creation, review, final approval of recipes, you want to be sure that everyone knows how to find correct ingredients, the latest versions of your recipes, and just the conventions that you use in your organization. With that, I'll hand it back to Ben for a few more comments, and then we will get into questions and answers.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Alicia. That was great. For anyone that would like some more additional training, learn a little bit more about the Genesis software, we do offer classroom-based training. We have 4 coming up beginning of 2018. Those are on the screen now. So we have our professional training, January 10th and 11th in Lombard, Illinois. Then we have a professional menu labeling training, so focusing more on the restaurant side of things, January 23rd and 24th in Lombard as well. Then another professional training, February 15th and 16th in Oak Brook, Illinois. And then an advanced workshop, February 21st and 22nd in Lombard, Illinois. At this point, we're going to go ahead and get into some questions. Before we do, if we didn't get to your questions, you can contact us. Information is here. You can give us a call, send an email to either our sales team or our support team, depending on if it's a question about your account or about using the software. And we also have our helpful links at the bottom. After this webinar, I think I mentioned before Alicia got into the actual meat of the topic, we will be sending out an email that has the recorded version of this webinar as well. So you should receive that later today. Now to get into some of the questions here, we've got a few. The first question we have is, how do I add a user code or product and supplier into my ingredients? Alicia, can you take that one?
Absolutely. Let's jump back into Genesis and I'll just show you. So when you've added an ingredient to the software, some of the fields available are the user code, and additional fields. I'll just pull up an existing ingredient. You'll see here, common name is one. That can be a shortened name. You can certainly populate that or not. The user code can be entered in right here. And it can be anything. It does need to be unique to each ingredient or each recipe. And the software will inform you if it's already finding that user code and not allowing you to apply that. But that's where you could just enter a user code. And again, in your organization, you want to have a convention set for those. So everyone's assigning the same system of user codes. And then for product and supplier, this one is already populated. It came from the USDA. But if I wanted to create a new ingredient and was populating this information, there's a drop-down list. So you click on the select button and there's a pre-populated list. So I can just select any of those, or I can select none if none of those apply. I can also create a new product. So again, if I'm needing to introduce a brand that isn't already in the software, I can select new and add a new product. The same goes for the supplier. Click select, you'll see the pre-populated list. Choose from there or click on new to add that to your ingredients.
Fantastic. Our next question, how do I know if an ingredient is raw or cooked?
Sure, so this is a question we commonly receive. I'll just do a quick search and show you some examples. We'll go back to that beef brisket since it's been shown already. If I type in beef brisket, and again, USDA, I wouldn't need to do that, include USDA, but I'd have, out of habit. We're going to see quite a few choices, and some of these are cooked and some of these are raw. Let me add raw to my search. And you'll see that it cuts down, filters through the results. These are all raw items, and the nutritional information connected with these items reflects raw form of that food. Most of these are single line items. They include raw in the name. You'll see that this one has an indent below it, but this primary description, this primary line includes raw. So all nutritional information connected with that would be raw. If I go back to that previous list and show both the raw and the cooked forms, you'll see most of these say braised. And then some have an indented line. So all of those, again, in this primary line, look to that primary line description to see what form of food or ingredient that is. With these, with the indented items, you can select a raw amount, like a raw weight of this ingredient, and the software will adjust that automatically based on the retention or the cooking yield and loss from cooking. But the nutritional information connected with that particular ingredient will always reflect a cooked form. So if you're considering labeling USDA items as packaged raw and you need a raw form of the food, you might select one of these raw cuts. However, if you're working with a finished product that is cooked and need to reflect cooked nutritional data in your recipe, you would want to find a cooked form of the food.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Our next question, when I use the where used search, is there a way to replace your ingredients in your recipes?
There is. I will show you how to do this and proceed with caution. Just a word. So you saw my list of recipes, what I had 20 at most. Your Genesis, after you've been working in a while, you may have hundreds of recipes in your software. So just be aware of the use of this. If you perform the where used search and you've identified 50 different recipes that use the same ingredients, you can replace those, but just be mindful of whether you want to or not, and that it's been communicated to everyone in your organization. So how to replace would be from the main screen, top ribbon. If you click on database, there is a search and replace button. So if you click on that, you can enter your search term. I'll enter in my white sugar. And I search. This search here is searching through the database of items that match that. And if I want to replace that white sugar with brown sugar, again, this is simply a search. It's not replacing anything yet, but it's telling me which one do you want to replace that with. So I select a brown sugar. At this point, this is where the damage can happen. So if you click on OK, it's going to say, all right, I've got in my case, 5 matches, 5 ingredient or recipes that I could replace. And to me, that may not be a big deal. And I could certainly replace those. And then, oops, I didn't really want to do that. So I could go find those 5 recipes with my brown sugar and replace those again. However, if instead of 5 recipes, then I had 10 recipes that were using brown sugar already, and how would I know which of those to replace revert back to the white sugar? So that's why I'm saying proceed with caution, but that it can be done. Just be mindful.
Great. Our next question we have here, can I choose which columns to display in my recipe too? Kind of like how you did with the search screen.
Absolutely. So let me open a recipe here. Here's my recipe screen. I've already built this. And you'll see, again, the columns displayed with your recipe information showing. Before I showed you in the search for screen that my search results display particular columns. The recipe screen also displays a variety of columns, and I can change those, again, depending on how much information I might want to display or share with others. So right-click, just like the other screen, right-click anywhere here, and the second option to the bottom is Display Columns. And here I can check through quite a variety of columns and information. I might want to see my percent weight for ingredients. So if I add that, it added the percent weight column. I could also add nutrient information here. So some folks might want to, as they're building their recipe, just keep an eye on calories. And this is per batch. So just be mindful, you might see some very large numbers, but it does show calories. I could choose other nutrients to view within this screen as well. So it just takes a right click and you have plenty of options on what to display.
All right, our next question, since it's such a big piece of searching, how do I add groups into my application?
Sure, I will talk about how to add them, and Ben may have some more information to add to this. So again, top ribbon, database, this is where you can add nutrients, add product and suppliers here, as well as where I showed you, and there's an option to add groups. So database, modify, groups. It shows you all those that come pre-populated in the software. You could add to characteristics if you wanted to track something that we don't. You could add to the food groups, and again, add your own. There is an option here to add new groups, and this is any of your organizational choosing. So whatever kind of system or whatever kind of categories or ways you need to think about your recipes, ingredients, and processes, you could use groups to address those needs. Ben, do you have anything to add in that perspective?
Yeah, we could just give a couple of examples of maybe some ways people have used it in the past. Phases of development is probably the biggest way that I've probably seen custom groups done, where you're creating a group for if the item is in development, or if it's in production, if it's retired, if it's waiting for QA, you can place it in those specific groups so that you're not exporting data from recipes that maybe aren't finished or are still waiting to be approved. You can also do custom groups based on different departments in your organization, whether it's R&D or marketing, whoever was creating those recipes. Or if you have a bigger organization, you've got a few different facilities that are making products, especially if you're wanting to separate the database and kind of segregate it between different groups so that people can't see each other's data. You set up a group for each organization or each piece of the organization, each different facility, so that you can separate data that way as well.
Thank you.
All right, our next question here that we got, is there a way to easily find the function keys if you don't remember those off the top of your head? If you don't remember what the F5 search is or what the nutrient search was, is there a way to find that in the interface of the software as well?
Of course, we try and make that easy. I think you might find that you will use a few of those, perhaps not all, but if you need a reminder on what's available, just again from the home tab in the ribbon, go to Preferences, and display options under General. Then the Show the Function keys, you can check that box and it will give you reminders of what those keys are. The ones I tend to use most are the More search, the F3, and the F5, the nutrient search. I've also been using the F11 though a lot more recently, the code search, the government code search.
And I think there was one other place you could find that data in that I'll kind of point out. If you open up the recipe itself, if you're looking for information inside the recipe, it looks like Alicia's doing that now on her computer. In the recipe tab, there is a search button at the top as well. So if you click on that search button at the top, it will actually give you all of the different types of searches and exactly which F key is tied to that as well. So if you're inside of a recipe looking for information, you can find it there as well. And then we have one last question that I'll go ahead and answer. When can we expect the next software release for Genesis and the food processor? And the answer for that is last week. We released version 11.4 of Genesis last week. I believe the food processor was a few weeks before that, so it's been out for a couple weeks. But the newest version with file attachments and all that sort of goodness is available currently. We do have a webinar that we recorded a while ago that goes over all of that information, that has all the different functions and features that are available now. So if you have any questions about that, you can certainly contact us and we can go over all of that. That said, that was all the questions we had. If we didn't get to you today, we'll certainly follow up later. Or if you want to reach out to our sales or support teams, we're always here to help out and answer questions. Thank you and have a great day.